There was a child who grew up in a very proper family. Everything had rules. There were fixed hours for studying, fixed hours for playing, rules about how to speak, how to behave correctly. When the child did well, the adults nodded in approval. When the child made a mistake, they frowned. There was not much yelling, but there were no warm embraces either, only familiar phrases. Why can't you be like other people's children? We do this for your future. You need to try harder. That child gradually learned an important lesson. Being loved depended on doing things right. The child learned self-control very early. They did not dare to make mistakes. They did not dare to ask questions. They did not dare to show negative emotions. They became obedient, high-achieving, and caused little trouble. Outsiders looked in and praised, "This family really knows how to raise a child." But few people saw that inside the child was a world full of tension. They were always afraid of being criticized, afraid of disappointing others, afraid of doing something wrong without even knowing what was wrong. When they grew up, that child became an adult who constantly pressured themselves, constantly felt they were not enough, and constantly felt guilty even when they had done nothing wrong. To understand why this happens, we need to look deeply into the psychology of parents who are harsh with their children. Not to condemn them, but to understand that harshness does not appear naturally. It is the result of fears, wounds, and deeply ingrained beliefs carried throughout a person's inner life. Most harsh parents do not think they are hurting their children. In their inner world, they believe they are doing what is necessary, even what is right. The deepest motivation behind harshness is often not power, but fear. They fear their child will not be strong enough, fear their child will be weak, fear their child will fall behind, fear their child will not survive a society that they themselves experienced as competitive, unsafe, and unforgiving. This fear is not always consciously recognized. It exists quietly in repetitive thoughts. If I am not strict, my child will go astray. If I do not push them, they will become lazy. If I do not control them, they will choose the wrong path. In psychology, this is a form of future-oriented anxiety. Adults imagine a negative scenario ahead and then try to control the present to prevent that scenario from happening. Children become the place where all of the adults' unresolved insecurities are poured. The danger lies here. When fear takes control, adults can no longer truly listen to a child's real needs. Every behavior is viewed through a defensive lens. Mistakes are no longer learning experiences, but signs of risk. Negative emotions are no longer something to be understood, but something that must be suppressed as quickly as possible. An adult who has never felt emotionally safe will find it very difficult to give their child freedom. To them, freedom equals risk, and risk equals loss of control. In the psychology of harsh parents, control is not a consciously chosen act of domination, but a survival reflex. They need to know where their child is, what they are doing, what they are thinking, what they are feeling, not out of curiosity, but because they cannot tolerate uncertainty. Uncertainty reactivates old fears, fear of abandonment, fear of failure, fear of losing face, fear of not being good enough as a parent. As a result, they impose dense rules, high expectations, and little tolerance for differences. In this process, children gradually stop being individuals who are growing with their own needs and become objects that must be managed properly. The child clearly receives the unspoken message, "I am only safe when I obey." From there, they learn to suppress themselves in order to maintain peace in the family. Many harsh parents were once children without a voice. They grew up in families where absolute power belonged to adults, where questions were considered defiance, where emotions were seen as weakness, and obedience was equated to morality. They adapted, they survived, they grew up, and precisely because of that, they reached a very dangerous conclusion that that way of raising children was right. They failed to see how much they had sacrificed to adapt: emotional safety, the ability to recognize their own needs, and the right to make mistakes. In psychology, this is called the normalization of trauma. When someone lives too long in a harmful environment, they stop recognizing it as harmful. They give it more acceptable names: discipline, training, strictness born of love. When they have children, they repeat the same model, not because they want their children to suffer, but because they don't know any other way to be a parent. What is familiar always feels safer, even when it causes harm. A deeper psychological layer of harshness lies in the relationship between parents' ego and their children's achievements. For some adults, a child is not just a child. The child is proof of their success, an answer to society's doubts, a way to affirm that they have lived correctly. In this state, every mistake the child makes carries meaning far beyond the mistake itself. It becomes a threat to the adult's sense of worth, and their natural reaction is to increase pressure. Scolding, comparison, belittling, and forcing are no longer about helping the child improve, but about soothing the adult's own deep-seated insecurity. A child raised in this environment learns that love is always conditional. They learn to measure their worth by achievements. They no longer ask, "Am I happy?" but instead ask, "Am I good enough to be accepted?" Many harsh parents may be very competent at work and very strong in society, yet seriously lacking in emotional regulation skills. They don't know how to name their fear, helplessness, or loss of control. And when emotions are not named, they find expression through behavior. Irritability, yelling, controlling, and punishing often become ways for adults to discharge emotions they should have taken responsibility for themselves. In such families, children's emotions are often dismissed. Sadness is seen as weakness, anger is seen as misbehavior, fear is seen as lack of toughness. The child learns to disconnect from their own emotions in order to be accepted. True discipline helps children understand consequences and develop self-regulation. Harshness only creates submission. Discipline is built on a secure relationship. Harshness is built on power and fear. Harsh parents often believe that fear is an effective motivator, but fear doesn't teach children how to live correctly. It only teaches them how to avoid punishment. And when fear disappears, so does the right behavior. A child raised in harshness doesn't learn responsibility, but learns concealment. They don't learn to understand themselves, but learn to guess what others want. As adults, these children often carry a persistent feeling of never being enough. They may be successful, yet never feel safe. They fear mistakes, fear judgment, fear disappointing others. They struggle to set boundaries because their boundaries were never respected in childhood. Analyzing the psychology of harsh parents is not an attempt to assign blame. It is an effort to understand that much harm is transmitted not through malice, but through unconsciousness. Only when we dare to face adults' fears, intergenerational cycles, and distorted beliefs about love and discipline do we have a chance to stop, not to blame the parents, but so that the next generation no longer has to grow up in silence, tension, and fear like the generation before them.